Welcome everyone. Today we are looking at international marketing. Focusing on P5 from the Pearson's specifications. Like always, we're going to start off with an introduction into the question, breaking the question down. Then we are going to look at globalization and what we actually mean by globalization, and then we're going to be reviewing globalization in terms of adapting products or globalization regarding standardizing, and then this will be followed with conclusions using company examples. Hey, let's look at the question first and try and understand that we understand the question. So it says, present an overview of the key argument in the global versus local debate. So present an overview of the key argument in the global versus local debate. Well, obviously we need to review the keywords first, and the key word here is to present. And in the English dictionary, the definition of present means to set forth, put forward, or put up. So, put forward the arguments regarding global versus local debate. But this is not actually clear in terms of what specifically is asking for. Global versus local in terms of what context. What exactly are we talking about? Well, we know we're doing international marketing, but really we need to go back into the Pearson's specification. In the latest Pearson's specification sheet, it outlines all the learning outcomes, but also it outlines within that section in terms of the learning outcomes and the assessment criteria. It provides additional information in terms of what Pearson's are looking for, and we really have to follow Pearson's guidelines. So if we look at this in terms of the learning outcome 3, investigate how elements of the marketing plan can be adapted or standardized across international markets. Focusing on, when we're talking about the learning outcome, which is relevant to the assessment criteria, global versus local, but Pearson's are talking about product adaptation. In terms of in terms of global versus local, should we adapt the product or should we keep it standardized? So this is what we're going to be focusing on. But first, obviously, we will look at how we're going to try and answer the question. So I'm suggesting, this is not definitive, you can come up with your own way of answering this question, but I'm suggesting that we lead into this firstly by looking at some definitions of globalization, and then we kind of like go a little bit deeper in terms of some of the issues of globalization, and then we state the case for standardization and we state the case for adaptation. So what should we do? And then after that, maybe give some company examples, conclusions of globalization, and maybe the use of the 4Ps. So really, if we're thinking global, it's either standardization, should we standardize or should we adapt? So, if we were using Shakespeare, it would to be or not to be. So first, let's look at some definitions of globalization. What do we mean by this? One definition can be seen as global marketing is concerned with integrating and standardizing marketing actions across a number of geographic markets. So here in this definition, it's actually putting forward the case of standardization. So standardization, is that right or wrong? I don't know. Let's have a look at another definition. Another definition states globalization is the spread of products, technology, information, and jobs across national borders and cultures. In economic terms, it describes an interdependence of nations around the globe, fostered through free trade. Yeah, there are certain geographic areas which have free trade, but then there are other areas where people export, and there are tariff barriers in place. So Europe, the European countries in Europe have free trade within the EU. But if countries outside the EU want to trade with China or with America, then there is no free trade between those countries. There are protectionist policies and trade barriers and trade tariffs. Definition shows, you know, globalization is the process enabling financial and investment markets to operate internationally, largely as a result of deregulation and improved communications. Collins, or from the US to make worldwide in scope or application, Webster. The financial markets are where the story begins. Well, we'll see. Globalization is a process of doing business worldwide. So strategic decisions are made based on global profitability of the firm rather than just domestic considerations. Yeah, I mean, again, what are we talking about from all these definitions? One definition looking at standardizing the marketing mix, the product, price, place, promotion, people, process, and physical evidence. The other definition in the green is looking at, looking at again the marketing mix. In economic terms, it describes independence of nations around the globe for free trade. Yes, there is free trade, and we are moving towards that, but we don't have free trade around the world entirely. But we are moving towards great alliances. Globalization is supposed to do business based on profitability of the firm rather than just domestic considerations. Well, yes, we'll be looking at other elements such as economics of scales and the need to go global and the need for firms to be in a global environment, because if we're not, and you only look at it from a domestic perspective, then maybe you won't survive in the long term. So here are some definitions. So you want to lead into your assignment by first looking at these definitions and actually pulling them apart and giving your own view in terms of what you think. Okay, because you're in the second year now, so you should be able to pull things apart and give your own opinion in terms of what you see. We are thinking global, so we're talking about global markets, countries around the world, and people. So globalization means harmonizing on a world scale. So smaller parts of different people in different countries are actually more similar than we think. That's what we're saying. And because we are similar in terms of our aspirations, needs, and our wants, then we're saying that if we're making products in one market, then we could actually sell these products to another market with similar type people. Differences between countries, becoming smaller, especially with improved communications, improved technology, and people around the world seeing what's out there. Increased globalization and internationalization will have an impact how companies view their marketing plan and global marketing strategy. So, when going global, what is going to be their marketing strategy? If you think about companies like Tesco's, what is their marketing strategy? Because they're in a global environment. If you think about Zara, well, Zara started off with one shop in Spain, and now they have over almost 2,000 stores, turning over almost 20 billion pounds of sales. So they're in countless countries. But what is their view? So if they're going global, they need to take a global perspective and look at how they're going to adopt their marketing plan, and then the use of the extended marketing mix to achieve the marketing objectives. So, again, moving on to the point, therefore, should companies adapt or standardize their marketing mix? So, in the question of Shakespeare, that is the question. So let's look at some arguments for standardization. Jane, 1989, and Levitt, 1983, believed that there is a union of cultures and smaller environmental custom demands. So, they're saying that cultures and people and needs and wants are actually quite similar around the world. And if you've got similar people with similar needs, do you really need to modify the whole of the marketing mix, um, which can be costly and more expensive, which will make you less profitable? Another argument are that trade barriers are lower and technological advances show, an increased global orientation. Even if you look in the EU, you've got all these countries in the EU and no barriers between these countries. So definitely from different blocks, Asia, you've got the American alliances. So you've got different blocks of countries who have no or very limited trade barriers between themselves. And in those instances, you could argue that between those countries, you should have standardization. So one strategy can provide consistency and lower costs, because if you think about it, if you are standardizing your your marketing mix being the product, the price, the place, the promotion, the people, the process, and the physical evidence, then and you're doing what you've already done and you've got what you've already done and you're now transferring it to another country, well, then it's costing you less. So then if you think about your profit and loss account, and your sales minus your cost of goods sold gives you your gross profit. Take away your administration charges, and it's in your administration charges where you keep your costs low to either increase or reduce your net profit. So we're talking about one, providing consistency in terms of the message and the communication, and lowering the costs so that your overall net profits remain high. And if your overall net profits remain high, and then after you paid your tax and you paid your interest from the banks and you've taken out dividends, then what you have left are retained earnings, and those retained earnings go back into the balance sheet and are invested back into the company potentially. So those revenues will be there to either allow companies to survive or utilize that revenue to invest back into the business, to develop and to be competitive. About the arguments for adapting the marketing mix or the product. Various authors supports customization. And what they look at, they state that entering into a foreign market would face environmental constraints, and so really they're taking a different view. Is that these environmental constraints are language, climate, race, education, taste. You've got different laws in different countries, different cultures, and different societies. And what they're actually saying is that in order to be effective, that you need to take these things into consideration. I don't know. Seeing one company in the UK selling toilet roll, and you see the guy talking, and I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but he what he's trying to say is one sheet, but he's saying one shit. I mean, the first time I heard it, I stopped and I was looking at this TV ad, and since then they've actually changed it. But the way it came across is one shit, but he was saying one sheet, but he didn't pronounce it in terms of the language, in terms of the communication in the TV ad. So I did chuckle, I have to say. There are also cultural differences rooted in history, such as education, religion, values, and attitudes. So, well, what we're saying here is that many people believe that this goes a lot deeper in terms of the different countries, and in these countries you have, deep cultural roots in education, in religion, and values and attitudes. And what we're really saying here, well, why is this important? This is important because this comes back down to affecting the consumer buying behavior and how and why people buy things. And this is what it's all about. How do you maximize sales? How do you increase sales? Because in your profit and loss account, you have sales minus cost of goods sold. One way to increase your net profit is either to reduce your costs or to increase your sales or to reduce the cost of goods sold. So these are the different ways that you can, tackle that problem. But if we're talking about increasing your sales, well, then we're talking about the the culture, looking at the consumer buying behavior. At the consumer buying behavior of Blackwell and Minard 2000, we can see that the buying behavior actually influences the pre-purchase evaluation of alternatives, and the purchase and the consumption. So these are going to affect how people buy. But with the Blackwell Minard model 2001, this is an updated version, but I actually like the Engel, Collett, and Blackwell model 1979, which had 3 more stages in it, which is kind of like missing from this version. If we look at what is missing in terms of the Engel, Collett, and Blackwell model, it is the attitudes, beliefs, and intentions, and the variables influencing the decision-making process. What we're actually saying is the decision-making process is actually influences people's minds in terms of people's attitudes, people's beliefs, and then people's intentions, which then lead and affect the pre-purchase evaluation of alternatives and the purchase and the consumption of goods. So this is why the researchers are saying it's so important to look at the individual cultures, history, and social economic factors of each country to tailor make your marketing mix to better influence the end consumer to actually make the purchase. But when you're looking at this, you need to take into consideration, consumer buying behavior models, the Blackwell Minard model 2001. I actually like the Engel, Collett, and Blackwell model 1979 because it had this additional section in with the attitudes, beliefs, and intentions, because that's what it affects. It affects our minds, and our minds, we have our attitudes, beliefs, and intentions. This is what it's all about. But so I like that model in terms of influencing. But nevertheless, the point is that we have to look at different people in different cultures and different countries with actually different aspirations and different needs. One could argue. When we look at adaptation, we've also got this view: the whole of the marketing mix should be adjusted according to sell and distribute in order to fit the new market's demand. So this view, in terms of adaptation, we're talking about adapting the whole of the extended marketing mix. The whole of the extended marketing mix, including the product lines, the product depth, the product width. We're talking about the pricing strategy. What pricing strategy? Are you going to go for a niche marketing strategy? Are you going to go for a cost-based strategy, psychological pricing? What type of pricing are you going to go for? Distribution. What distribution outlets are you going to sell to, and why? Promotions. What type of promotions are you going to use? You've got advertising, sales promotion, personal selling, direct sales, and public relations. What are you going to use? What is going to be the use and extent of the marketing promotional mix? Is it going to be the same as you use in your domestic market? Are you going to standardize it, or you're going to adapt it to meet the different cultural needs of different societies and different countries? So what are you going to do? But they're saying in the adaptation side that you need, in terms of linking to the consumer buying behavior models, to look at the individual customers and then adapt them accordingly in order to get the maximum benefit of increased sales, which then leads to a greater gross profit. So let's look at let's look directly at standardization and adaptation in terms of the advantages and disadvantages, the pros and cons. So, which is good from if we standardize and you go global, well, you have economies of scale, and economies of scale affects the profit and loss account in terms of your cost of goods sold. So if you have your sales minus your cost of goods sold, and through economies of scale you get lower cost of goods sold, therefore sales minus your cost of goods sold gives you your gross profit. And if you have economies of scale, you're going to have an increased net profit. Net profit divided by sales times 100 gives you your net profit percentage margin. You have faster setup times because you've already done this already. You have a single coherent global image, which is consistent and works. Excellent monitoring of communication, so you can monitor the whole process and it's done quickly. What are some of the disadvantages? Loss of advertising effectiveness, because if you're not meeting the needs of customers, then they're not going to respond, they're not going to buy. So maybe you may have good economies of scale with reduced cost of goods. However, maybe you have lower sales because your marketing or your advertising is not as effective. Little reactivity and little flexibility can create negative reaction from neglecting local needs. Again, if you're not looking at the local needs, you can have a negative impact from it. Let's look at the adaptation. So in the adaptation side, we can say the advantages of adaptation is respect local specifications and expectations. And in other words, you're meeting the needs of people in other countries, and if you meet the needs of other people in other country, then really you're looking at the LTV, the lifetime value of a customer, because the customer's needs are going to be met and they're going to keep coming back to you again and again and again, which makes you more competitive and more profitable. You have excellent local image, and also you have customers keep their landmark and feel noticed. So they feel noticed, they feel respected, and again their needs are met. Therefore, repeat purchasing to that company that meets that customer's needs. Have the disadvantages of adaptation, and we can see there are higher costs, definitely higher costs, and definitely more time consuming, and poor speed of execution, definitely, because you're doing more research, you're doing more primary research, you're conducting more secondary research, and you're doing this in order to find out exactly what you should do, where, when, how, and why. There can be difficulty to know what customers really want, but this comes down to higher costs and lower times, simply because you're trying to undertake the research to find out what the needs of customers are, and sometimes it can be difficult. So let's go back to the suggested layout, and in the suggested layout, again, I've said to provide definitions of globalization. An introduction into some of the issues of globalization. You need to state the case for standardization. You need to state the case for adaptation, and look at the pros and cons of each, and then give your conclusions of globalization. This is what I'm suggesting. So let's look at some company examples. See, on the axis we have either low or high product differences, or low or high promotional differences. And let's look at some companies that might fit this graph. So we can see that Apple, for instance, has low product differences and low promotional differences. And so what does that mean? If there's low product differences and low promotional differences, then you're standardizing more. But the higher the promotional differences and the higher product differences, the more you need for adaptation to adapt to different markets. But the lower, then you're going to focusing more on standardization. So this is all about money. This is all about how much profit one makes, and you're going to have to offset it. You're going to have to offset in your profit and loss account in terms of sales, and it's the sales, because the more you adapt, possibly the more you could increase sales. But the more you increase sales in your profit and loss account, the more costs you incur in terms of research, cost of staff, cost of buying any things that you need to buy in order to meet those needs and to find this information out. It's going to mean that your administration charges are going to increase, therefore reducing your net profit. So it's a balancing act to see which one can balance one out, to see you'd get the maximum from either adaptation or standardization. If we, this is all about striking the balance, So if we think about it, we're saying to ourselves, should we standardize or should we adapt? And maybe we should say maybe we shouldn't just say we're going to adapt or we're just going to standardize. Perhaps we need to look at the situation and the circumstances, and we need to take a balance of the two. And so maybe we need to do both. We need to standardize and adapt. I mean, we've got the extended marketing mix of the product, price, place, promotion, people, process, and physical evidence. So maybe, and then within those elements, we've got other elements in terms of the product range, the product mix. We've got the promotional mix, advertising, sales promotion, personal sales, direct sales, and public relations. So it's a question of saying, what do we standardize and what do we adapt? Maybe not completely adapting, but maybe not completely standardizing. At the McDonald's marketing mix, for instance, the worldwide, from a global organization, they've had ads shot in 12 different languages. So we can see there, even though McDonald's have a great deal of standardization in terms of the foods that they offer, even though they do adapt some foods in different countries, selling a different ranges in different countries, depending upon the needs and tastes of that country. So again, we can see part standardization and part adaptation. If we look at McDonald's and what they've done in various countries, we can see that they've customized products for each region. So again, they've gone for part adaptation as well. If we look at the 7Ps adapted for physical distribution, well, because we've got the product, price, place, promotion, people, process, and physical evidence. Well, in the physical evidence, in some countries they started adapting and changing the look and layout of the store to give it a more rustic kind of feel, and then the advertising is changed in line with the overall feel and look of the store in certain countries. But this is not in all countries, this is only in certain locations, again adapting to specific countries. But at the same time, if you look at their processes and their practices and their core product lines in terms of their hamburgers, cheeseburgers, Big Macs, quarter pounders, and so on and so forth, these are the standard product lines and ranges which have been standardized in terms of how it's cooked, the machinery that's used, the process, the practices, and how they actually carry out their cooking, their cleaning, which has all been standardized. So again, this company has standardized a lot of their processes and practices and equipment, but then other areas of the marketing mix have been kind of like adapted depending upon the country and the country's needs. So I actually think that when looking at the question of standardization or adaptation, I think it needs to be depending upon the situation and the circumstances. It needs to be dependent upon what time period you're looking at, what your end goals, looking at what you're trying to achieve in terms of profit margins, and how quickly you're trying to act. And also you need to look, what's going to give you the best outcome in the time period that you're looking to achieve that outcome. So let's look at the conclusions then and round up. So we looked at questions and we've broken down the questions in terms of the keywords. We've reviewed definitions, and we've also looked at standardization or adaptation. We've looked at conclusions, and we've also looked at the examples from McDonald's. So I hope this session has helped in terms of the question P5 in international marketing. Really, adaptation or standardization in terms of taking the Pearson's guideline, the product, but taking it slightly wide in terms of the marketing mix maybe, but you can still focus on just the product in sort of adaptation or standardization. Okay, many thanks today from Mr. Tan.